Now, delighted to welcome to the show this evening. We have Danny Higginbotham with us. Danny, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Yourself, how are you keeping?
Strange times. I mean, I'm in my living room with a giant poster of Kevin Kilbane, so it's not really.
I was going to say that he's looking trim as well. So
He is back at his peak.
At all.
Back at his peak.
Yeah.
So I presume you're holed up and self-isolating and all that business.
One of the things that we're trying to do is make sure my parents are all right. They live just around the corner, so go into the shop for them if and when needed. But it's difficult telling the older generation they've got to stay in, I guess, at times, and our two youngest as well. Keeping them occupied because obviously they've been out of school for over a week now, so it's a bit of homeschooling. But I don't think it's overly important that we get too carried away with that, the homeschooling side of things, because, like I say, it's a very bizarre time for everybody, and I think it's just a case of really, if possible, just keeping everybody's spirits up whilst, there are some incredible people in the world at the moment going above and beyond to try and keep everybody safe. So it's just a case of, listening to what's being said. Unfortunately, there's still a number of people that which aren't helping the situation, and, as the NHS and everybody's saying throughout the world, help them by staying at home. And I think it's the least that people can do.
I agree with your point on parents. I think they can put themselves under too much pressure at the moment.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think that, we see a lot of stuff on social media, people putting videos on Instagram and what have you. And, that's all well and good. That's great, that you're showing that you're teaching your children and what have you. But I think it's also a time when they're going to question what's going on to a certain extent. And thankfully, last Thursday evening, we went outside and, clapped the NHS and what have you. It was something that, it's the least that we can do. And my two youngest had no idea what they were doing whatsoever. They were just going outside and banging pots and pans. And I was happy with that. I was happy that they didn't know. But one thing is for sure that, in a few years and when things settle down, I'll explain to them who the real heroes are around, because, sometimes, well, not sometimes, but the majority of the time, the people that are the real heroes of what's going on in the world at the moment don't get the credit that they deserve. But I, for one, will be making sure that my children and the rest of my family are well aware, without question, who the people are that have stood up to be counted in this situation.
Your parents are Manchester-based, aren't they? Are they handling the orders okay?
To a certain extent. They live not far from me now. I moved them closer to me a few years ago so they could be close to the grandchildren. And I went to the shops for them about a week ago, something like that. And, we're touching base. We're speaking even more now. We have like a WhatsApp group chat. And so we're speaking to them a lot and having a little bit of a laugh. And they've discovered technology. It took them a little while to be able to answer the phone. They'd answer the phone, it'd be upside down. They'd just do bizarre things. They'd call me at random times without knowing they'd done it. And I just say to them, if you want me to go to the shops, then I will do it. But just call me, because you've got to stay in the house. And then every now and then I'll get a message from them saying, I'm just going to go to the corner shop. I'm just going to do this. I'm like, no, you're not. I'll go and do it for you. Just tell me. And all of a sudden they seem to have extra food in the house, which I wasn't happy about. So it obviously means that they're doing it, but they'll probably look at me as their snotty-nosed son still, when all I'm trying to do is just make sure that they're okay. So the more they listen, I think the better it will be.
No, it's a real role reversal. When you were a teenager, they were telling you to stay inside and be good, and now complete opposite.
Complete opposite. It's true. I think as your parents get older, to a certain extent, I don't think it's the right word to say take control, but you try and take the lead to a certain extent because, they've looked after you throughout your life. So it's the least you can do as they get older and a little bit less sure of themselves and a little bit less sure of what's going on in the world, to make sure that they're all right. And I think it's myself as a son. It's the least that I can do. But getting them to listen, I suppose, sometimes is a little bit different. But like I say, I think so far up to a certain point they are listening and they understand the importance of it, because you only have to switch the news on for 5 minutes to understand and get a real grasp of how serious this is.
Yeah, you sure do. And are you watching the news for hours on end, or are you trying to moderate that?
I think it's important that you watch it to make sure that you're educated, but I think you also have to get away from it as well, because unfortunately, on the news at the moment, there's no real positive news. I think we're still climbing as a nation within the UK, as many other countries are in Europe and the world. But I think it's important to be across it, but not get too bogged down, because I think if you do get too bogged down, then it's really going to affect you. So I think you've got to step away at a certain point and, try and make the most of these times where you are with family. You're cooped up in your house. There's very little you can do. Yes, you can go for a walk, as we do every day. You can go for a run, and that makes you feel a lot better. But just try and flip it on its head to a certain extent, and say, right, okay, you've got more time with your children and the rest of your family than you usually would do. So can you make the most of it? Whether it be phone calls, whether it be, group chats where we're all on video calls, where, if there is someone that's a little bit down, you can have a chat with them. I've just enrolled to help with the NHS, which hundreds of thousands of people have done in the United Kingdom, which is absolutely brilliant. It says a lot about the whole community, the whole UK in total. So I leave myself on call for that. If there's anyone that's vulnerable that wants to have a chat, I think it's the least that I can do, because I think when you're in a situation like this, you feel helpless because there's nothing other than listening to what's required of you from when you listen to the news and they say, you don't go out and you do certain things, or if you are going out, just remain as the family that's living with you. Or if you go on a run, make sure that you're out of the way of people and the things that you have to do when you have to go to the shops. But other than that, you actually feel quite helpless, and I don't like feeling like that. So the NHS side of things is the only real thing that I can do to a certain extent to try and help and to try and take a little bit of pressure off the people that are striving so much and just working endless hours. And like I said previously, are the true heroes of this awful situation that we find ourselves in. Yeah,
well, good man. And is your the volunteerism, did you say it's to be on the end of a phone, that kind of work, or?
Yeah, so basically what it is, it's something that everybody can get involved with. I think there's a lot going on Twitter about it, and you can enroll, and then it takes a little bit of time because they need to make sure that you're able to do it. And then I got an email back, you download the app, and what it does, you put the area that you live in, and then if and when needed, you will get a phone call or you'll get a text message saying that, this individual wants to have a chat. You can then call them. I've not had one as of yet. But I'm ready and waiting for if and when it occurs. So people that are at home, if they do want to help out in any way, then I think that's something that can be done. It can be done from your own home, because obviously we know that there's been thousands of former doctors, former medics, nurses, what have you, that have gone back to help out, which I think is, like I say, it's absolutely magnificent. And I know I keep speaking about it, but I just can't say enough about those people. They're putting themselves at risk for everybody else.
I know. This whole saga is going to probably change society and change all of us in ways we can't fully appreciate just yet. But a genuine, a deeper, authentic appreciation of what people in the NHS do and the medical services over here do, as opposed to just intellectually. We all know, of course, those people do phenomenal things, but everybody seems to feel it right now.
Yeah, 100%. Because what we have to remember is that we've got a few friends that work within the NHS, work at the local hospitals near us. And, they have children, and they are doing 18-hour days, then coming home, having to near enough isolate themselves in their own house. And, it's incredible what they do. And I think, if anything, what you realise when you are at home and you're not able to do the things that we take for granted every single day is that you realise you do take things for granted. But one thing I've always said, it's so difficult not to take things for granted because it's just on a day-to-day basis. But situations like this, they really make you stop, take a breath, sit back and realise just how fortunate we are as individuals to be able to do what we do on a daily basis without having to think twice. And, God willing, everybody, or as many people as possible, can come out of the other side of this and, get a better understanding of how fortunate we are.
To segue to matters less important, i.e. your football career, which is the point of the chat. You seem incredibly in touch with your community and have a very rounded view of the world. For the kid who comes through at Manchester United, of all places, and then has a Premier League career, and there's huge money and there's fame and there's adulation, were you always relatively grounded, or was there a period of growing up?
I'd say my upbringing kept me quite grounded. My dad would always put it to me that if I see you getting ahead of your station or above your station, then I'll drag you back down. And, you know, my dad growing up was the one that I respected hugely, but I also had that fear of him as well, in the nicest possible sense. And when I was an apprentice at United, I absolutely loved football. So I would go training all day, and then where we lived, there was a huge car park. And in the winter, we would go and play football there. And my dad went to a pub called The Bridge, which was basically on a bridge overlooking this car park. So I always had a friend that every now and then would just keep a lookout, just make sure that if my dad was coming out, I'd just be sat by the side. And one day I got caught, and I thought I'd got away with it. My friend wasn't doing his job. My dad saw me, carried on walking home. I thought I'd got away with it. And as I went home, I knocked on the front door, and we all had Manchester United blazers. And as soon as I opened the door, he threw the blazer in my face. And he just told me in no uncertain terms, he went, go. Said, don't come back. And I was like, wow. And I went walking for probably a couple of hours, and then I came back and knocked on the door, and he ripped me to pieces without laying a finger on me. Just to try and get me to understand what I was putting at stake, what I was putting at risk for my future. But I didn't understand it, and I didn't get it, but I did after that. And I like to feel that the upbringing as well at United, you know, the names that were there when I was coming through as a younger player, you know, one of the greatest ever Irish players, Roy Keane, you know, coming through. You had the likes of Giggs, you had the class of '92, Eric Cantona, players like that, just incredible footballers. And there was no edge on them, in my opinion, whatsoever when you were around the training ground. So if there was no edge on them, and they were some of the best players in the world, then, you know, a teenager trying to make his way through could have nothing like that. And that was the biggest thing I brought from United: how to be an individual, and how to grow up, and how to be a man.
That's very interesting, because really, more than most clubs, there's a huge number of former Manchester United academy players and youth team players who went on to have very, very successful Premier League careers. And I always thought that was more than just, well, they were good players to begin with, and that's why they were at United. I thought there was something in the grounding the club gave them. When you say there's no edge on the likes of a Cantona or a Keane, what does no edge mean on a daily basis, Danny?
I mean, from my perspective, as a 16-year-old, you know, they would always be there for a chat. You wanted to have a conversation. It wasn't an issue, you know. With Roy Keane, he was sponsored by High Tech, and I used to get his old boots. Then it was Diodora, and he used to get his old boots, and it was wonderful for me. It was absolutely brilliant. And I remember one occasion, I'd come back from training, and Jonathan Green, and he was injured at the time. I was probably only maybe 18 at the time, and Jonathan Greening was injured, and I've come back, and he said, Roy's looking for you. And I went, well, what's the problem? And it was like, he wasn't happy. So I said, well, what's he said? He said, well, that somebody had rung Diodora up on my behalf saying that I wanted to get boots off them. And to this day, I have no idea who it was, what it was, or anything like that, because as young players at United, we didn't have agents. So I've gone home, and obviously I've told my mum and dad, and I was like, I can't leave it. You know, I can't leave it knowing for well, if I'm going to go in tomorrow, then I'm going to see Roy, and, you know, he's obviously not going to be happy with me, because I understood completely the situation, that if he's looking at me and thinking, well, I'm giving you my boots, what's the problem? Why does an agent have to get involved? Because it was sort of frowned upon, and rightly so, in my opinion, at the time. We didn't need anything like that as younger players. So I got home, and I rang the club, and they were good enough. They gave me Roy's number. And I rang up, and I think it was his wife that answered, and she said, you know, he's out walking the dogs at the moment. So I gave it 10 or 15 minutes, and I rang back, and I was expecting him to, like, you know, go really off on me, be really angry. And it was an unbelievable conversation. He just said to me, he said, Danny, he said, you're doing well. He said, but please trust me. He said, at the moment, you don't need an agent. You don't need anything like that. You know, you're getting boots from me. You know, I was getting his older boots, because they didn't tend to wear boots for that long. You know, so they were near enough brand new. And I explained to him, I said, you know, I would never do that. I would never have anybody ring up. And he really understood me, and I really understood him. And it was a really good conversation for someone as young as me to understand, you know, the point of view of of a world-class player at the time, the captain and leader at Manchester United, and for him to take the time to speak like that to me at such a young age, spoke volumes, I thought.
Because you cleaned his boots.
Yeah, it was Roy Keane, Brian McClare, I think Terry Cook as well. And it was bizarre because as an apprentice, when I would go in the morning and clean the boots, it was just bizarre. I wanted the boots to be as dirty as possible because I then wanted to make them clean. And it was something that really frustrated me as I got older, because we got to a point, especially when I was at Stoke towards the latter years, that all went out of the window. And there was no boot cleaning. If you wanted your boots cleaning, you had to go and speak to the academy players individually and say how much money you were going to give them. And it was ridiculous. Whereas, like, from my perspective, it wasn't just cleaning the boots. It was having an understanding that you would go in the morning and you would say to these first team players, what boots do you want for today? Tell me which specific boots you would want for today. And that created a conversation between you and first team squad players. Yeah. So eventually, if you got the opportunity then to go and train with the first team, or you moved into the first team dressing room, you'd built a relationship with these players. So it wasn't as daunting as it had been previously. It wasn't as daunting as it could have been. Whereas now you've got younger players that don't really have anything to do with first team players. They don't have any connection with first team players, because you can guarantee all the first team players' boots that I cleaned, they'd been in my position before. So they understood it and they got it and they could relate to it. So therefore that built relationships within first team squads all the way down to apprentices. And it was something that I really appreciated.
Yeah. And even for those of us who never played at a remotely high level, there is a simple, almost meditative kind of joy about cleaning your football boots and watching them go from muddy and horrible to looking just dandy, and you sit them on the table and you think,
it's brilliant.
Can't wait for the match tomorrow.
But it was even like myself on a Saturday. If I had a game on a Saturday, because I played 2 games at the weekend, so I'd play on the Saturday and then I'd play on the Sunday. And after I played on the Saturday, it was a case of scrubbing my boots down, polishing them, then filling them with newspaper, putting them under the radiator so they didn't shrink or anything like that. And then first thing in the morning, you take the newspapers out of your boots, and it was pride. It was pride in having the boots when you went out onto the football pitch and making sure they were clean. And that was the pride that I took with the first team players as well.
Danny, to jump ahead for a second, I do want to jump back to United before we finish with it. But on Roy, needless to say, he tends to crop up on Irish radio conversations quite a bit. And there would be numerous players, and I fully believe them, who would not tell the best of stories about Roy and the temper and the bad moments. And I'm sure they're all true. But it's notable that you then joined up with him when he was a manager at Sunderland. So clearly your time with him at United gave you this the trust in him as a manager. How did you find him then in that year at Sunderland? That was the year they stayed up, wasn't it? That amazing Premier League year.
Well, I don't think he gets credit for what he did at Sunderland. I think he took them when they were rock bottom of the Championship and got them promoted that season, and then stabilised them in the Premier League. The following season, which we all know is a difficult thing to do. And when he wanted to sign me, first of all, it was an honour that he wanted to sign me. I was absolutely delighted that he wanted to sign me, because obviously, the club that I supported throughout my life was Manchester United. On the odd few occasions, I was fortunate enough to play alongside him. I played against him, and then for him to want to sign me, was something that I was really keen to do, to get back to the Premier League, to get back to a club of the size of Sunderland. Obviously, they're struggling at the moment in the lower depths of the league. But to be managed by him as well, because I knew he was such an intense character as a player. Quite often you would hear players at United that were playing week in, week out, and they would say that training was harder than a lot of the games that they would play at the weekend. So that tells you just how intense the training was. And to then go and be managed by one of the greatest players, like I say, in my lifetime was a privilege. And he could be extreme at times and could lose it, could get angry, and what have you. But that was his desire, that was his will. And I don't think it's any surprise that if you look at the results that season, how many goals we scored late on in games. And Roy at times he had his assistants that he trusted implicitly for training. And what he would do, he would sit back and he'd just look at everybody's mannerisms and the way they were. And there was a prime example. We played Manchester City on the Monday and we got beat 1-0. And then on the Thursday, shape, because it was we were playing Newcastle at the weekend, so we did shape and I wasn't in the team, and it looked like it was going to be the first time I was going to be dropped. So then on the Friday we had our usual 6 or 7 aside, whatever it was, and I was obviously frustrated, so I just went up front and I think I ended up scoring 3 or 4 goals. And then on the Saturday morning he named the team and I was in the team and I scored. And then afterwards in the press conference, you know, I think he was asked the question, you know, what do you think about, you know, Danny scoring and what have you? He said, I saw him in training the day before and I had a feeling he'd score today. So there was method behind the things that he did. And what I loved about it was he didn't care for reputations. If you'd had an unbelievable game on a Saturday, but then didn't bother giving your all in training during the next week, you won't be playing the following Saturday. And that's how every single training session was. Right. But that's something that was taken. Obviously, he took it from Manchester United, probably from Forest as well under Brian Clough. But it was something that I took throughout my career as well. Because like I say, the calibre of players that I was fortunate enough to train alongside till I was 20, 21, if it was good enough for them, then it was going to be good enough for me.
Yeah. It's interesting when you look at your career. So coming through under Ferguson, and I know ultimately that was maybe a handful of games, and you don't want to suggest that you have an innate understanding of Ferguson's work over the years, but you come through under Ferguson, you end up working for managers like Roy, like Gordon Strachan, like Tony Pulis, who maybe got the best out of you. I don't know, is this by accident or design, but there is a certain mold of manager that you have found yourself working under. Yeah,
and you know what, I've add Jim Smith to that as well. You know, mate in peace, he passed away recently. I was with him at Derby.
Yes,
just wonderful characters, but all within their own rights. You know, Jim Smith was obviously coming from Manchester United, where yes, Sir Alex Ferguson, the greatest manager in my opinion that's ever been around. But I can't honestly say that he was my manager on a week in, week out basis, because like you've quite rightly said, I played 6 or 7 games for United, so it was an honour to play those 6 or 7 games. But it was then when I went to Derby, and Jim Smith had such an unbelievable manner about him that only few people can do. Where after a game, he could rip you to pieces, absolutely rip you to pieces, up with the best of them, and then 2 minutes later he's giving you a big kiss, and then it's forgotten about. And I think that's something that's a real problem now in football, if I'm being really honest, is that players take things too personal from managers, when in all reality, managers and even teammates, if they're having a go at you, it's for a specific reason. It's because they believe you can do better. I remember just after I'd made my debut at United, Jim Ryan, who was a reserve team manager at the time, he said to me, because we used to get change at the Cliff and then drive over to Lilton Road, he said, come on, jump in the car. So I jumped in the car and he said, what do you think about the weekend, your debut? And I was like, it's a dream come true. You know, all my family are Reds. I've been at the club since I was 9. He said, have you got anything you want to ask me? And I said to him, yes. So for the last 2 years, all you've done, every training session, no matter what's going on, no matter whereabouts on the pitch it's been, you've somehow brought it back to me and had a go at me. And I said, I'm just wondering why. Why did you do that? And he said, I'm really happy you've asked me this. He said, because a bit of advice I'm going to give you now will see you well for the rest of your career. The minute a manager stops bothering with you, stops arguing, stops having a go at you, he doesn't care anymore. He's given up on you. And it was such a wonderful bit of advice for me, because then I took it throughout my career. And as you get older, you start to understand that certain managers would have a go at you because they knew you could take it.
Yeah.
They would have a go at you because they knew that you could take it, but they're actually having a go at somebody else, if that makes sense, who might be sat next to you.
It's funny you say that, because Wayne Rooney 2 weeks ago in the Times, he wrote his first column and he was saying with Ferguson, pretty much every half-time Ferguson had a cut at Rooney and Giggs. Yeah. It was just his go-to. So Rooney said if Nani was dribbling too much, he had a go at Giggs for dribbling too much. And if Ronaldo was losing the ball too easily, he had a go at Rooney for losing the ball too easily. So I was just thinking, Ryan Giggs for 20 years of his life having Ferguson coming at him. My God.
It's so true, but we had it when we was at Stoke with Tony Pulis. Like you would walk in at half time and he'd just give you a wink, and regardless of how you played, you knew you were getting it, but you knew there'd be no hard feelings, because it was all dependent on who you were sat next to. And if you sat next to or sat in and around somebody that possibly couldn't take it, what he would do, he would dig you out, but every now and then he'd take a look at that other person. So the other person were like, is he having a go at me or not? Well, I'll take it that he's not having a go at me, but I don't want him to have a go at me, so I'm going to take the advice.
Yeah.
So it's all about man management. And I think that's, sometimes managers don't get the respect and the understanding that they should do, because people think they put a team out on the pitch on a Saturday, go through the tactical side during the week, and that's it. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
You have to understand the workings of all the players.
Like for you to go to Derby was a ballsy move, because you're 21 years old at United. You have a 4-year contract in the bag, but equally you've got Denis Irwin in front of you, you've got Phil Neville, you've got Sylvester. The writing is fairly apparent. So you embark on this career. You're 5 years at Stoke under Pulis, very successful. He always struck me as a manager who maybe doesn't get the credit. People talk about him and his teams in a certain way. There's obviously a hint of truth in how Stoke played. But I mean, it's not like just anyone can get a team to play with that kind of cohesion.
No.
Game after game, the wind at the Britannia, motivation levels need to be up. So, Pulis, interesting character, and not the more complex than you might think. Like, I know he's obsessed with Napoleon and history. He's a different character to what you might just think. He's not just a bang on the table merchant.
No, not at all. He's up there with the best man managers that I've ever worked with. If you look at players that he brought in, I think either he nicknamed us the Battersea Dogs Home, I think at the time, which was, and you had to say to a certain extent there was truth in what he was saying, because he would bring players in that he believed could play in the Premier League, but had maybe lost their way a little bit, and he would make them feel 10 foot tall. He simplified things the way he went about things, and the problem is there are a number of managers, in my opinion, that don't get the credit they deserve. That's because I think we're going through a huge period of snobbery now in football, in particular in England, where if it's not played a specific way, then it's not right, which I think is a load of rubbish. At the end of the day, the aim is to win games. Now, if we'd have turned up in the Premier League with Stoke and said, right, Arsenal come in, Chelsea come in, Manchester United come in, Liverpool will come in, let's play them at their own game, the game would have been over after 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So we had to do what we could do for our strengths. Now, Manchester United in particular, they were one of the most difficult teams at the time to do it against, and Chelsea as well. Because what they used to do, they used to beat us at our own game, which was the physical side of things, and then their quality would come through. And more often than not, in particular in the early years, we had to hold our hands up and say, right, they've come and they've outfought us, and then their qualities come through, and you have to hold your hands up.
Sorry to interrupt. Even that's a very interesting insight into what it takes to be a winner in the Premier League. Like United and Chelsea. Yeah. And the legacy of Keane and all these other teams, let's go there and fight them. Exactly. If they want to fight, we'll fight. We can do that too. Yeah, and
that's what they're incredible. It was absolutely unbelievable. So we went out on the pitch, and it was our home form that kept us up, in particular in the first few seasons. And we knew, and every team that came to our place, they knew that they were in for a scrap, and they knew that if they were to get anything, they were going to have to outfight us, and then maybe their quality could come through. And United did that early on when we were in the Premier League, and Chelsea did the same as well. They stood up to be counted. They went man for man with us, outfought us, or give as good as they got, and then their quality came through. And we walked off the pitch, walked into the dressing room, and you understand and you realise that it's not enough for teams like United and teams like Chelsea. The two teams that were dominating at the time, it wasn't enough for them to just have world-class players. Yes. They had world-class players that could do the other side of the game as well.
So you came through at United 94 to 97 in the youth team, and then you're there through until 2000. And there's Champions League games in there. You're at the Maracanã, that infamous World Club competition in Brazil. What I wanted to ask you was, when you look at the United dressing room, just the way it operated, the characters like Keane and others, whatever about their playing ability, we can park that for a second, just in the way the dressing room operated day to day, how did that compare to a Stoke or a Sunderland or a Derby or the other dressing rooms? Like, on the one hand, it'd be tempting to say, well, the United dressing room, it was superior. but maybe, you know, the Stoke dressing room was just as good in terms of attitude, just maybe the skill deficit.
Yeah.
So was the United dressing room different in ways to the other dressing rooms you experienced in football?
Yeah, I think that it was, because when you look at that dressing room at the time, you know, you go all the way from back to front. You know, you look at Schmeichel,
big character.
You look at Jaap Stam, you know, you look at Gary Neville. You go into midfield, you look at Butt, you look at Scholes, you look at Keane, you look at Beckham, you look at Giggs, you go up front, you look at York, you look at Coy, you look at Solskjaer, you look at Sheringham. These, and this is why I say for me was, you know, people ask me what was the biggest thing that I learned at United growing up. And when people say, is it, you know, how to be a better footballer and what have you, it wasn't, don't get me wrong, you're training with very good players. You go to the first team, you're training with world-class players. So that's going to make you a better player itself. But the biggest thing that I took away from my time at United, being there for as long as I was, all the way from being a young player, was that the reason these players were world-class players, yes, their ability spoke for itself, but it was the drive. The drive was just immeasurable. It was unbelievable. There'd be arguments and falling outs in training if someone wasn't getting something right. And it was brilliant for me to actually be part of this. I remember I trained with the first team, and it was round about the Christmas time, and it was at the Cliff, and the pitch was frozen. And Denis Irwin, and they had a game the next day. Denis Irwin was playing right back, and he's gone past me. And it was a situation where, like I say, the pitch was frozen. I could have slid in, maybe got the ball and maybe taken out Denis as well, but I didn't, because there was an understanding from my perspective that they've got a game tomorrow, and I didn't do it. Schmeichel probably ran out of his box 30 yards to absolutely destroy me. What are you doing? What are you doing? You know, there's a challenge there. You have to go and make that challenge. So there was so many learning curves along the way, because in my opinion, it was like, well, I'm not going to make this challenge because he's going to be playing tomorrow. He's a senior player, one of the best fullbacks in Europe at the moment. And here's me, this young lad. If I tackle him and I injure him, how bad's that going to look?
I'm still on your side, by the way. I think you did the right thing.
Yeah, and so did I at the time. But then it was said to me, you know, you train how you play. What would you have done in a game? The answer is I would have made the challenge. So then you do that in training. But then some of the first team players came up to me afterwards and went, listen, just understand that that's what it's all about, but we understand why you did it. So that was just huge. But yeah, just to go back to the dressing room, there's just so many just unbelievable characters. And I fast forward that to my time at Southampton, to my time at Sunderland, to my time at Derby, and to my time at Stoke as well. Probably Stoke in particular. The dressing room, is in terms of being driven, was incredible. The quality, we know, was a million miles away from that United dressing room, but the drive that we had in that dressing room, because success for us in particular in the first couple of seasons was to remain in the Premier League. So whether it's drive to remain in the Premier League or whether it's drive to do what United did to go and win the treble, it's still drive. And Stoke was one of the best dressing rooms that I was fortunate enough to be in. And that's probably because at the time, Tony Pulis, it was more important for him to have the right characters as much as having good players. And if you've got that, then, you know, that's 70% of the battle.
If you take away Keane and Schmeichel and probably Gary Neville, I would presume, who were the most vocal in that United dressing room around then?
It's a difficult one, because I think leaders come in all shapes and sizes. You know, you look at Paul Scholes, who, in my opinion, the best midfielder that I've seen in the Premier League, whether that be playing with him or playing against him. He'd make the smallest pitch that we had at Stoke look like the biggest pitch on the planet. It was so annoying. But he would lead by example, as in terms of, okay, you know, we're on a little bit of trouble, give me the ball. And that was one of the things that I found when I went from United to, say, Derby at the time. At United, when you got the ball, your biggest decision was who you're going to give it to, because 8 players wanted the ball off you. Whereas then if you go and you're in a little bit of a relegation fight, it can be a little bit different, because maybe not everybody, because their confidence isn't at the highest, maybe not everybody wants the ball. Yeah. But there wasn't a player in there that I would look at and think wasn't a leader, which is absolutely incredible. And like I say, leaders come in all shapes and sizes, you know, and all different forms, whether it be vocal players like you just mentioned, whether it be players that could just give you a look, whether it would be players that would go out on the pitch and just demand the ball in the most awkward situations and take it. Every single player within that dressing room was a leader, and I think that's why they had so much success.
Yeah. Solskjaer, by all accounts, would go home and in his journal jot down what had happened at training that day. So a student of management from very early on. His current job was never going to be easy. I think what's been most impressive was around the time it looked like it was about to end for him. There was that period where this is getting serious now for him. I never once saw him lose his head in the media. He was always very calm. I thought that was very impressive, a very good sign. Who knows how things will turn out, but that was a good sign. Him as a person, probably a bit steelier than the baby face and the curly hair would suggest.
Yeah, you don't remain at a club like Manchester United for as long as he did, and not have that steely presence about you. I've been fortunate enough with Ollie that, you know, I remember him from back when he was at United, and he remembered me as well. And in doing what I do, and I've spoken to him probably a good 4 or 5 times over the last year when I've been covering United, and the way that he speaks, you know, from my perspective, when people were saying that, you know, he's not got the qualifications to do the job, he's not got this, he's not got that. Well, Van Gaal and Mourinho had won everything there was to win, and it didn't work out. You know, eventually, it didn't work out for either of those at United. And then when I've spoken to Ollie, when I've been covering the games, he's been telling me, you know, what he wants to do, the fact of wanting to bring in young players, hungry players, and everything that he's said to me when I've spoken to him on the phone is what he's doing. You know, you look at the transfer windows of the players that he's brought in, they've all made a difference. Younger players, hungry players that want to succeed, that want to be successful. And I'm desperate for him to succeed, because I think he's a wonderful individual. He's a lovely, lovely guy. But like I say, don't think because of, you know, like what you've just said, you know, he may be, you know, the baby face and things like that. Yeah. He's not someone that will suffer fools.
How has the adjustment to retirement been?
For myself personally, it was easy. I always said that one of the things I would say about myself is that I knew my strengths and I knew my weaknesses. I wasn't a player that was technically unbelievably gifted. I knew that what enabled me to have, you know, a half-decent career was giving everything that I've got, probably putting my head where some people wouldn't put their feet on the pitch. And a manager probably knowing that I'd run for a brick wall for him. And I knew if that was to ever disappear, then it was the end for me. And when I did my cruciate at Stoke, that was the beginning of the end. And I went to a few different clubs, and then I went to Sheffield United. And then the media side of things started to get going for me. Then I moved to Chester because it was semi-professional. And then football was starting to get into the way. But I promised some of my friends that I'd go and play for Altrincham, which is, you know, the club and the area where I'd grown up. I promised a lot of people that I'd end my career there. And I only ended up playing 2 games. I played my second game, I think it was away at Gainsborough, and I was atrocious. And there was a challenge probably about 60 minutes into the game, and I bottled the challenge. And I come off the pitch, and I knew that was it, because I didn't want to get hurt. And I always said to myself, the day I don't want to get hurt on the football pitch is the day I'm finished. And I rang my parents, I rang my wife, and I said, I'm done, I'm finished. And it was okay for me. It was all right for me because I had something to go into. I think there's a lot of footballers that do struggle now because you finish and then there's this void about what are you going to do next? Because it's not easy, because you have, I don't know if I want to call it a job, but you have the greatest job in the world. Yes. You know, it's something that we all love. You know, people love watching it. I love playing it. And it's something you always wanted to do since I was a kid. And then when that ends, because age and injury can get the better of you, sometimes it can be difficult. And any players that are coming towards the end of their career now, if they ever ask me, you know, what do you suggest is the easiest transition, the best way to transition out of playing football? I always say to them, keep playing whatever level it may be until you know what you're going to do next, because you're a long time retired. And that's the best bit of advice. But for me, I don't miss it. I don't miss it at all. I had my time. I enjoyed it. I consider myself very, very honoured and very fortunate to have been able to do what I did for 20 years. And I'm one of the fortunate few that's been able to do that.
And are you glad, Danny, that when you're 21, you do look at Denis Irwin and Phil Neville and Silvestre? And I know United accepted a bid from Derby, and Ferguson said, look, you don't have to go. You don't have to go, but we've accepted the bid. So, you know, he's been pretty upfront with you.
Yeah.
Was that the right decision? Because it would have been, I suspect, very tempting to stay at United till you're 25, rack up, 50, maybe, appearances, substitute here and there, maybe 10 minutes a pop, but maybe 40, 50, and to be, former Manchester United player, Danny Higginbotham.
No chance. No, not for me, because the one thing that I found at my time at United was that there was players that were 23, 24 and 25 at United that were never going to be in the first team. We're never going to get to the first team. But there was an association with United. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's each to their own. But for Sir Alex Ferguson to call me personally and say to me that, we've had a bid put in from Derby County and it's been accepted. And to be fair, at that time, it was considerable money for someone that had just made a handful of appearances.
$1.5 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was $1.5 million, which was good money at the time, especially for someone, like I say, had only made a handful of appearances.
Yeah.
But then for him to say to me that, Denis Irwin, Mikel Silvestre and Phil Neville are ahead of you, but you can stay. My mind was made up the minute he rang me, because if he wanted me to stay, he could have turned around and said, Danny, I just want to let you know that a club's coming for you in the Premier League, and that tells me and should tell you how well you're doing. And, you've got the opportunity to kick on last season. If that was the conversation, then that's different. But the conversation to me wasn't, we want you to stay at the club because we think we think you can challenge the 3 players. The conversation was, we've had an offer. You can stay at the club if you want to, but I'm just letting you know that this offer has been made.
Yeah.
And yes, I could have stayed at United. You quite rightly said I'd only recently signed a new 4-year contract, but my time had come. I was going to stay for 1 more year, but I always promised myself that when I got to 22, if I hadn't made my mark, I was going to leave, because I didn't want to be somebody that was getting God knows how many appearances in the reserves, but not really getting much of an opportunity in the first team, because your career to a certain extent could have been over before it began.
Yeah, and I guess the last point to touch on, you've mentioned your family at several times in the conversation, even right at the top. One of the things I think we probably underestimate on the outside is that the majority of footballers come from very, very normal backgrounds where, this world is a gazillion miles away. It's not on their radar. And then suddenly their son is playing for Manchester United Premier League football for well over a decade. And families go on the most unbelievable journey as well. Must be pinching themselves that they're suddenly going into Old Trafford and the Britannia and all these games. Are there kind of fond memories or moments where you did get to think to yourself, geez, I'm taking my parents along for the ride here as well. This is fun.
Yeah, there's a few actually. I remember the first one was I went on loan to Royal Antwerp from United, and there was a lot of characters around the club that were obviously well known around the Antwerp area, and my mum and dad were flying over. And one of these gentlemen said, listen, I'll look after your parents, I'll look after your dad and what have you. So I was like, okay, no problem. So we played the game. I left my dad and my mum in the company of this individual who had been really good to me since I'd been there. And I went out with my friends. And I came home, and my dad, never ever seen him be sick from drink ever. He can handle his drink, he's old school, used to go to work and then straight to the pub afterwards. And
drank at the bridge. The man drank at the bridge.
Drank at the bridge. His local was the Quarry in Timperley. And he could handle his drink. And I came home from my night out and I thought I was looking at a teenager. He was leaned over the toilet, spewing his guts up. And he said that he'd been introduced to a beer called Duvel, which you can basically put a flake in it. It was, and yeah, he was a lot worse for wear. There was another incident when I was at Derby. We played Bolton away, and I scored a penalty. And I didn't know until afterwards, but my brother jumped on the pitch, got arrested, got dragged out, and the police let him back in, fortunately. So that was another one, but that was mayhem. And then when I first moved to Derby, about a month or two after I'd been at Derby, my dad had a stroke, and he was all right. He was okay. You know, he had to settle down a little bit. And his first game back was when we went to Old Trafford with Derby, and we had 2 games left. We needed 1 win from our last 2 games to stay up, and we beat United at Old Trafford, and that was his first game back. And I have no idea why he chose that to be his first game back. And the pub which he used to go into, the Quarry, it was a blue pub. There was a lot of Manchester City supporters there. And the first time I played at Main Road for Derby, they dragged him in, and they pinned him to the floor, and they put a Sean Go to Manchester City shirt on him as well. And he swears to this day that they would never go back to the stadium. But yeah, you know, they've enjoyed. Yeah, I'm sure. They've enjoyed the journey. They've enjoyed the journey with me. And the one thing they always used to say to me from where I was brought up was, you know, do you want better than this? Do you want a better lifestyle for your family when you get older? Not that I needed that incentive, but it was always a yes. Whereas it's very difficult for me to tell that to my children now, because I have been very fortunate and very privileged.
Well, listen, it's been great chatting with you. Fascinating. We could have chatted for another while about loads of things. I must ask you about trying to get past Denis Irwin sometime in the future. I'm sure that was no picnic.
No, I'm the first one to say he's a gentleman, absolutely brilliant. He was always there for advice, and I still say the best left back in my time in Manchester United. In the generations gone past, he was just so unassuming, but on the pitch, he was another genius, amongst geniuses in that team.
I mean, it is ridiculous he wasn't left-footed and just slotted and just was like an unbelievable left back. Even that alone,
he was just effortless. Yeah. But the thing was, he was like, he'd come into training, do his training, go home, but then come to games, and he was just this unassuming individual.
Yeah.
Just such a lovely guy. Always had time. You know, he'd sit down and talk to you as a young player, and obviously as a fullback as well. And then he'd just go on the pitch, and he'd just have wingers in his pockets, and you're just looking at him thinking, wow, he's the best left back, you know, that I ever saw at Manchester United. Don't get me wrong, United have had some incredible ones over the years. You know, Patrice Evra up there with him, and you know, he would give Ashley Cole, who I think at a time in his career was the best left back in world football. He'd give him a run for his money as well.
Yeah, it's the unassuming character. Maybe he doesn't get the credit.
Yes, definitely.
But listen, Danny Higginbotham, real pleasure. Look after yourself.
Likewise, you too.
Strange times, and thanks so much for doing that.